Hello, and welcome to Dig a Podcast, a show that tells the in-depth story behind the songs of the greatest band that is, was, and ever will be, the Beatles. In this season, Season 1, we will explore the Beatles' first LP, Introducing the Beatles, or our UK listeners would know it as Please Please Me. Introducing the Beatles was originally scheduled for a July 1963 release, but came out on the 10th of January 1964 on VJ Records, whereas Please Please Me was released on the 23rd of March 1963 on EMI's Parlophone label. Let us continue the journey with the next song,
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Misery. Although the song is not as memorable as most of the early Lennon-McCartney tracks, or McCartney-Lennon as they were listed for their first British and US albums, it is very characteristic of their songwriting and performance styles in various ways. It is undeniable in its charms, especially for American audiences who, for one reason or another, were denied access to this song on any album since October 15th, 1964, when the Introducing the Beatles album went out of print. While almost every other song released by the Beatles during their career was available in the US on million-selling albums or singles throughout their career, the unavailability of this track made it sound even more charming when it was found by American audiences. Being able to find the cherished Lost Beatles song made an enjoyment even sweeter. American audiences would have to wait until March 24th, 1980 to hear this track in stereo, as we'll see later. Songwriting history. Brian Epstein, the Beatles' manager, had been encouraging Lennon and McCartney as songwriters, not only for use within their band, but also supplying material for other artists. Brian saw the monetary and promotional possibilities of supplying known recording artists with new material to record and perform. The Beatles, unfortunately, did not have an established credibility this early in their career. It was January 1963, and the group had achieved a top 20 British hit with Love Me Do, and had just released their second single, Please Please Me, on January 11th, which was only just beginning to make its appearance on the British charts. But, stirred up by Brian Epstein's encouragement, Lennon and McCartney decided to have a go at writing a song especially intended for a particular recording artist. The Beatles were just about to start an extensive nationwide tour on February 2nd, 1963. They were fifth on the bill under Helen Shapiro, whose British rock career the Beatles were very well aware of. At the age of 14, she began her string of British hits in April 1961 with the top 10 Please Don't Treat Me Like a Child, followed by two number one songs, You Don't Know and Walking Back to Happiness. This was followed by a number 2 hit, Tell Me What He Said. In early 1963, Helen's deep and muscular voice was a hot commodity, surely hot enough to be top of the bill of a nationwide tour. On January 26, 1963, a mere week before their tour with Helen Shapiro began, Lennon and McCartney started work on a song with the sole intention of presenting it to Helen, being that they would, no doubt, be in her company during the tour, that they felt would be comfortable with her style and suitable for her voice range. They reasoned that, even if it ended as a flip side on a future record of hers, it could still be a boost for their songwriting career. They started writing the song backstage before a performance they had given at the Queen's Hall, Stoke-on-Trent, and then completed the song at McCartney's home on Forthlin Road shortly thereafter. Shortly after the tour began, McCartney, being ever the PR man for the group, got up the nerve to present the song to Helen herself. The song was written, then presented to Helen's manager, Norrie Paramore, who, unfortunately, rejected it outright. In retrospect, McCartney has stated that the reason for the song was turned down was probably because of the downbeat nature of the lyrics. The fortunate turn of events did occur, though. Kenny Lynch, a black singer, songwriter, entertainer, and actor from London, also heard the song and decided to record it himself. Apparently, John and Paul first needed to alter the lyrics to accommodate a male instead of a female vocalist, changing it to "I'm the type of guy," for instance. He had a minor hit with the song, making it the first original Lennon-McCartney song ever to be recorded by another artist. Kenny Lynch's version of the song put a soulful spin on a pop song, which caused little dissension from Lennon, mostly because of his utilising the skill of British session guitarist Bert Weedon. Lennon told Lynch about those feelings during a meeting in music publisher's Dick James' office in 1963. "What did you want to have Bert Weedon on the session for?" Lennon explained. "I would have played it for you if you'd asked me." Kenny Lynch would also cross paths with a Beatle years later, appearing on the famous cover of the hugely successful 1973 album Band on the Run by Paul McCartney and Wings. As far as the songwriting itself goes, both Lennon and McCartney are in agreement that Misery was pretty much a 50-50 credit, possibly favouring Lennon slightly. The original first line of the song, as sung by Kenny Lynch, was "You've been treating me bad," whereas during the Beatles recording of the song, the line is changed to "The world is treating me bad." This is done with the intention of giving the song a more universal appeal. Recording history. The recording of this song took place during a day-long recording session of which they recorded the bulk of their first British album, Please Please Me, on February the 11th, 1963. It was the fifth of the 10 songs recorded on this day, being the last one recorded during the afternoon session of 2:30 to 6 p.m. Noting that there were multiple takes recorded of 4 other songs during the afternoon session before Misery, it could be estimated that the 11 takes for this song was recorded in the last hour, or between 5 and 6 p.m. The Beatles all played their usual instruments during this recording. Take 1 of the song was complete and performed with great vocal enthusiasm. Ringo even puts in a little drum fill after the second verse, which he dropped later. Already in place was the ending with John and Paul's alternating oohs and la-la-las, although they sounded fresher and more vibrant this first time around. The only fault in this take was George Harrison's rhythmic guitar run in the bridges of the song, which weren't in time. Probably for this reason alone, they were asked to try it again. Just before take 2 begins, George practices a guitar run by himself, and it sounds as if he's got it perfected. This take starts out a little rough though, with the band's timing being off just after John and Paul's vocal introduction. They quickly recover from this and put in a spirited performance, only for producer George Martin stopped the recording just as the second verse was beginning. Martin noticed that Harrison's guitar sounded louder and somewhat more distorted, so they asked him if he'd changed the guitar. "No, I probably changed the tone," is what George Harrison explained, although he probably just turned up the volume. Being the gentleman that he was, Martin asked him to clean it up a bit and a little less volume, George, and then they were ready to try it again. After a bit more practice on the guitars, take 3 began, only to fall apart just after the first verse started because John forgetting to switch the guitar chords. Take 4 goes a little further, but just into the second verse, John sang "She Won't" instead of "I Won't See Her No More," which called this try to a halt as well. Take 5 ended at the same spot because, as John was concentrating on getting the words right, he forgot to change the chords again. It took a little time to drill the words into John's head before the next take began. Except for another slight timing issue at the beginning, take 6 was off to a good start. They had added a few interesting touches to the arrangement by this time. The first notable one was Paul's added grace notes on his bass guitar sprinkled here and there. The big surprises here are on the fourth measure of the bridges, where, in addition to Harrison's guitar run, Ringo adds a snare drum roll, not unlike what he performed a month later at the end of Thank You Girl. The eighth measure of the bridges also contained this snare drum roll, along with a newly constructed guitar riff from Harrison that goes nicely back into the verse. The end of the song also features Ringo's snare drum rolls whenever either John or Paul sings their oohs or la la las. The timing wasn't perfect, but we see them being very adventurous with the arrangement, possibly at the suggestion of George Martin. However, Martin must have instructed them to simplify the arrangement again, instructing Ringo to play the straight 4/4 beat throughout the song, and for George to only play the first guitar run on the bridges, dropping the second run during the vocal, only one lonely one. They implemented these changes for take 7, which is also a complete performance of the song. John changed his ooh at the end of the song to a loud hum, but still insisted on the la la la, as the song eventually would be fading away. It was probably about this time that George Martin decided himself he would add a piano overdub at a later date to replace Harrison's guitar run, which he was asked not to play because of his not being able to get the timing right. He apparently began recording the next takes at the speed of 30 IPS instead of the usual 15 IPS to facilitate this future overdub work. While take 8 broke down just as the first verse began because of John flubbing lyrics, "You've said the wrong words," Paul points out to John. Take 9 was a complete version and was deemed the best at the time. Misery considered complete as far as the Beatles' performance was concerned. It was now 6 p.m. and time for a break to gear up for the recording of 6 more songs by 11 p.m. February 20th, 1963 was the date that George Martin chose to record his piano overdubs onto Misery, thereby putting the finishing touches to the song. Since only twin-track or 2-track machines were used for Beatles recordings at this early stage, only minimal overdubs were attempted because they need to bounce additional mixes in order to create them recording space, each bounce reducing the quality of the original recording. I found with the Beatles, George Martin explains in the book Maximum Volume, The Life of Beatles producer George Martin, that if I recorded the rhythm on one track and all of the voices on the other, I didn't worry about losing the voices even if I recorded them at the same time. I could concentrate on getting a really loud rhythm sound, knowing that I could always bring it up or down afterwards and make sure the voices were coming through. This being the case, after George Martin completed his piano overdubs for Misery, the clarity of the Beatles' original performance was still quite good. The Beatles were not present on this day because of being in the midst of the Helen Shapiro tour, but from 10:30 a.m. to noon in the EMI Studio 1, their piano overdubs were completed. George Martin experimented by adding piano overdubs onto take 9, but upon listening to the Beatles' performance, decided that the first half of the song was flawed in various ways, such as a speeding up tempo at the end of the first verse, and a flubbed bass note from Paul at the beginning of the song. George Martin decided to perform an edit of 2 different takes to get the finished master of the Beatles' performance, the first half of take 7 and the second half of take 9. Upon listening to the original recordings of both takes, it appears that the main edit occurs just as the third verse begins, at the word "shend," while George's guitar run in the first bridge of take 7 must have been edited out as well. With this complete, George Martin went back to work in performing his piano overdubs onto what was now take 11, playing the exact riff that Harrison would have played on the guitar, only in octaves, and of course with perfect timing. He also played a piano arpeggio on top of George's introductory guitar chord, and added 2 accent notes in between the lyrics in the final 2 measures of each bridge. It took 5 takes for him to complete these overdubs to his satisfaction, takes 12 through 16. This becomes the first of many songs during their career on which George Martin accompanies the Beatles musically. Engineer Jeff Emerick, who was present on this day for his first of a history of sessions he would engineer for the Beatles, details his witnessing of George Martin's overdub for Misery. That session was my first exposure to George Martin's signature wound-up piano recorded at half speed in unison with guitar, but played an octave lower. The combination produced a kind of magical sound, and it was an insight into a new way of recording. The creation of new tones by combining instruments and playing them with the tape sped up or slowed down. George Martin had developed that sound years before I met him, and he used it on a lot of his recordings. Overdubbing a half-speed piano is not the easiest thing to do either, because when you're monitoring at half speed, it's hard to keep the rhythm steady. There certainly were more than a few expletives coming from George as he struggled to get the timing down while overdubbing onto the song Misery, on both the spread chord that opens the song and the little arpeggios and chord stabs that are played throughout. All of the original mixes of Misery were done on February 25th, 1963, in the control room of EMI Studio 1 by George Martin and engineers Norman Smith and A.B. Lingen. 2 mono mixes were made on this day, the first a chopped off introductory chord, which appears on the original British Please Please Me album. The second mono mix, with the full introductory chord, was sent to VJ Records in the US for inclusion on the Introducing the Beatles album. For some reason, 2 stereo mixes were also made on this day, possibly to supply a version with slightly more reverb for the American market. All of these mixes, though, did have a slight touch of reverb added. An amusing note to add concerning the recording of Misery is the most noteworthy example of the Beatles pronouncing the consonant S as SH. It can be slightly detected on other Beatles songs of 1963, such as I Wanna Hold Your Hand, When I Say That Something, but it can definitely be heard on Misery, Send Her Back to Me. Add to this the comedic la 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 during the fade out of the song, and it is apparent that the song is viewed by the band as an album filler, being recently rejected by Helen Shapiro. But for our benefit, this adds a comedic touch, which adds to its charms and gives us a hint of the fun-loving Beatles we would soon get to know in the movie A Hard Day's Night. Thanks for listening to Dig a Podcast. You can subscribe to our podcast on Spreaker, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or any other podcasting platform. This has been a Team Wilco production. Until next time, if you know what I mean. Do I did? No? Okay.